Now, once again, Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, has blamed the troubles or problems the Star Wars franchise has faced on oversaturation, on bringing out too many movies in too short of a period of time, by recently saying this in an interview with the BBC. I have said publicly that I think we made and released too many Star Wars films over a short period of time. I have not said that they were disappointing in any way. I have not said that they were disappointing in their performance. I just think there's something so special about a Star Wars film, and less is more. And before we break that down a little bit, there's another quote taken from the same interview where he was asked about Marvel, asked about oversaturation there, and how there's been 10 Marvel movies in the past 3 years, and will be 8 more in the next 3 years, and this is what Iger said to that. Marvel is just doing sensationally well. The last film they released, Avengers Endgame, had the highest grossing global box office in the history of the motion picture business, and the pipeline is very, very rich with new stories and new characters and new adventures and new superhero exploits, so not true. Okay, so first of all here, in all fairness, I don't know how directly related the two statements are. Yes, they come from the same interview, but I couldn't find a transcript of said interview to know how these questions were even posed to him exactly, or if he went right from talking about one to the other and was essentially comparing the two. I only have an article about it on the BBC's own website, which I will link in the description below. All that said, there are a couple very curious things implied here, and probably unintentionally so. First, he said that there is something so special about Star Wars that less is more. And in this case, less is apparently less than one movie a year, which is the rate they've been coming out at for the past 5 years now. So does that mean Marvel isn't as special as Star Wars? Because they've had multiple movies come out each year for over a decade now, and sometimes up to 3 movies in a single year. Again, probably not what he was trying to imply. And though as a huge Star Wars fan, I can certainly agree that there is something special about Star Wars that, at least once upon a time, separated it from all the other franchises out there, I cannot and will not agree that somehow one movie a year is too much Star Wars, that both avid fans of the franchise and the more casual fan to average moviegoer somehow finds one movie a year exhausting, or that it takes away from the magic of Star Wars. I mean, think about how crazy that sounds. One movie a year makes Star Wars not special anymore, and that's why people won't go and see it. And right in this interview, he almost contradicts himself by even saying he hasn't been disappointed with the Star Wars movies in any way, including with their performance at the box office, I'd assume. Which is, come on, ridiculous to claim when Solo is confirmed to have lost money, somewhere around $90 million in fact. So let's be real here. If Solo had been a smash hit and made a ton of money, do you really think Bob Iger would have come to the same revelation that less is more, or that there was something special about Star Wars? Or would it be full speed ahead right now with the films? Would Solo 2 not be in the works as we speak if the first one had made over $1 billion at the box office? We even know Alden Ehrenreich, who played the young Han Solo, had signed on for up to 3 movies, which implies Iger didn't think there was something so special about Star Wars before the films weren't bringing in the kind of money he'd expected, or that less was more then. And come on, if less really is more when it comes to Star Wars, why do we know about 3 Star Wars shows coming to the Disney Plus streaming service? Won't that ruin what's special about Star Wars even further? I know Iger specifically says movies in his comment, but how can people be expected to watch an hour-long episode of a Star Wars show each and every week for multiple weeks, when apparently going to a single 2-hour film every year is too much and ruins the special nature of the franchise? You can't tell me that Star Wars is only great when it's some type of rare event that comes around only every few years, and then drop $100 million on the first season of a Star Wars show for your streaming service, not to mention have 2 more in the works, without looking like you're full of it. You can't tell me a franchise is so special that it can, essentially, carry your streaming service and warrants a huge production budget and multiple shows, but that people will suffer Star Wars fatigue when there's one movie a year. I mean, in theory, wouldn't all these streaming shows just exacerbate the problems with the movies? Isn't watching near movie quality Star Wars at home week in and week out going to make people less likely to go see the movies if it being a rare event is what makes it great? And yeah, I realize Iger doesn't want to say or do anything right now to jeopardize the potential success of The Rise of Skywalker. Now's not a good time to say he was disappointed about the outcome of some of the films, whether that be in terms of financial success or fan reception. Right now you just smile and say everything is fine, the situation is normal, and hope that episode 9 is well received and makes a lot of money, and then afterwards you come up with a new plan, or an actual plan this time, for Star Wars movies going forward. That then brings us to another interesting thing Iger said in these comments, this time about Marvel, when he said, "The pipeline is very, very rich with new stories and new characters and new adventures and new superhero exploits." And I'm sure that's a comment that will anger pretty much every fan of the Star Wars expanded universe, because Star Wars also has a treasure trove of stories, characters, and adventures written primarily by people with a profound love and understanding of the material, and it was again called the expanded universe. And one of Disney's first official actions was to wipe away everything in it and only keep the 6 movies from George Lucas himself, as well as everything from the Clone Wars animated series. And as I've said before, I can, to an extent, understand that decision. And before you attack me in the comments, let me explain. It was a lot of material to beholden themselves to, and limited what could be done with new stories going forward if it was all just considered canon. Not to mention, not all of it was great, though yes, plenty certainly was, and the continuity of it was not always flawless either. And you know what that sounds a lot like? Comic books. Fans of comics will of course say similar things about them that gets said of the EU, only a bit more to the extreme with comics, considering some characters have been around and been written continuously for decades now. Anyway, they'll say that sometimes stories within comics are great, other times not so much, that there's huge issues with continuity, or with many stories or characters getting changed when new writers take over, or things getting retold or reused, or characters get brought back from the dead randomly, or things from previous stories just get flat out ignored. So what did the MCU do with all this history they had behind them with the comic books? Did they try to beholden themselves to decades upon decades of stories? No, it more or less uses the comics as a guide or outline for how to handle the characters in the movies and what stories to tell about them. And this same thing could have easily been done with Star Wars. The expanded universe could have been used as, at the very least, a vague outline. The characters created there could have been brought over to the big screen and introduced to new audiences. And they didn't have to be exact copies of their written counterparts, just used as inspirations for them. And now, when things aren't going as well as hoped with Star Wars, we have to hear Bob Iger indirectly imply that Star Wars didn't have a huge wealth of stories and characters already in place and at their disposal when Disney took over. And after learning again from Bob Iger, this time in his book, that George Lucas's ideas for the sequel trilogy were completely thrown out, it means Disney felt like they were better off going with completely new story ideas over the ideas or stories of the creator of Star Wars himself and the many, many passionate authors who had made the EU beloved for decades. And I can't help but hear in my head right now Yoda saying, "That is why you fail." In closing here, though, yes, I do feel like Star Wars is something special, that it's held in a higher regard or people expect more from it. At the end of the day, the handling of it is as simple or as difficult as the handling of any other franchise out there. In order to get people to watch and to keep watching, you have to tell great, interesting stories with characters that are equally great and intriguing. That's such an obviously painful statement that I really shouldn't even have to say it. Yet Bob Iger's comments make it sound like solving the problems with Star Wars movies is just figuring out the right cadence for their release. But this isn't Goldilocks and the Three Bears. There is no such thing, within reason of course, as too many Star Wars movies, or too few, or just the right amount. This idea that if you put out too many movies too soon, it'll make them not feel special anymore is ridiculous. What makes a movie great, or what makes it feel special, is the movie itself. It isn't how long you waited to see it. And sure, the build-up to a new Star Wars movie is part of the charm, you could say. It's cool, especially here in the modern era with the internet, to speculate and talk about what's to come. But to somehow imply that when the credits roll on a Star Wars movie, I, or anyone else, needs to wait a specific amount of time before the next one in order to properly build up my excitement level for it to continue to feel special, is really silly. When something is great, we don't need to ready ourselves for the next part. Instead, as human beings, we have a tendency to want what we want right now. When we like something, we want more and more of it, and we only force ourselves into moderation at times for either our own good or our health. I mean, why do you think binge watching a whole series in one sitting is a thing many people do? Because we hate waiting. Hell, I even have friends who won't watch a television show week in and week out, but will instead wait till the whole season is over to watch all the episodes at once. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me if you think there is such a thing as too many Star Wars movies in too short of a period of time. And I'm of course talking within reason. If in some crazy world, a new movie came out every week, yeah, that might just be a little too much. But is one movie a year really too much Star Wars? Do the films need to build up? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.